Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is really weird. Like, it's got a pretty strange premise, no pun intended. It's basically an alternate universe prequel to the events of the very first Final Fantasy game that was released on the NES all the way back in 1987. I didn't think the basic-ass story of 4 warriors of light venture out to save the world from darkness needed a prequel, let alone a non-canon alternate universe one starring a guy whose top songs playlist on Spotify is just the entirety of chocolate starfish and the hot dog flavored water, but what the hell do I know? And even weirder, it's a Souls-like. Well, actually, maybe not as weird, considering that Soulslikes are to current year what third-person shooters were to 2007, but imagine the pitch. The original Final Fantasy, but mixed up a little, and also now it plays a bit like Dark Souls. Or Nioh, considering the devs behind that, Team Ninja, alongside Dead or Alive, Ninja Gaiden, Hyrule Warriors, and are also responsible for this. It's certainly one of the more out there concepts for a video game, or at least it doesn't feel of its time. This feels like something I would have seen back on the PS3, with its weird premise, certain aspects of its gameplay, heck, even how it looks and runs sometimes. It's a real oddity. In some ways, it feels out of place in the current gaming landscape, much like Jack in the fantasy world he's found himself in. And that kind of gives it a charming allure that not a lot of games have these days. Stranger of Paradise is a game that has quite a few faults, but almost all of these faults are to do with aspects surrounding the core gameplay. The story's kinda whatever, the level design meets the bare minimum, the gear system is tedious, but the moment-to-moment gameplay itself is consistently excellent. Provided you're okay with its flaws, this odd new entry in the Final Fantasy series is very likely worth your time. Whether you're a fan of the Souls-like genre, you're getting into it for the first time, or even if you just like Final Fantasy. So I want to start off by reiterating that I have little to no experience with the Souls-like genre. I've played a bunch of them here and there trying to get into the genre, but usually I would end up dropping them after the first area or so, as I wasn't a big fan of the idea of dying in a few hits. Past me was stupid, of course. I tried Dark Souls 3 again a few months ago, as the first boss basically kept handing me my ass on a silver platter until I realized A, I needed to be patient, and B, I actually needed to use the block button. Once I realized that, it was only a matter of time before I conquered the boss and finally kind of understood Dark Souls. Kinda. I haven't played it since then, I've just had too many other games to play, but recently I got an itch to try the genre again, seeing everyone enjoying Elden Ring and being like, I want to play that looks fucking incredible. Before that, however, I was lucky enough to get a copy of the game pegged at me by Square Enix, to which I thought, alright, no excuse now, it's time to get into Soulslikes. And before people get up me about calling this a Souls-like, come on guys, be reasonable. This is a Souls-like. Checkpoints that refill potions and make enemies respawn, losing half your dang health bar in one fell swoop, a focus on blocking, parrying and dodge rolls with iframes, getting locked into an attack animation until it's over so you can't just hit dodge whenever you feel like it, unlocking shortcuts to make backtracking easier. It's a Souls-like, dude, come on. And saying otherwise would be like saying acid rain isn't rain because it makes people's skin melt rather than just making them all wet and moist. Still rain, y'all. The key word here is Souls-like, keep in mind. It borrows mechanics and ideas from Dark Souls and other From Software titles, but it differs when you get down to the specifics of combat. Stranger of Paradise's combat revolves around the acquisition and leveling of numerous jobs, all of which have their own unique stat spreads, attacks, abilities, and equipable weapons. These jobs are all reflective of jobs and vocations from other games in the series. There's standard stuff like Sword Fighter, Lancer, and Thief, to more well-known ones like Black Mage, White Mage, and Dragoon, many of which you'll have to unlock by progressing through certain job skill trees. I stuck with Swordsman, Marauder, and Mage for a while, thinking that I should be picking my favourite classes and focusing solely on them, but what the game actually wants you to do, at least early on, is dip your toes into more or less every class in some way, and it encourages this with varied enemy design and having some areas where certain classes will make things much easier. The Lancer is great for bats and other flying enemies, for example, with its long reach and ranged attack, while another area is full of elementals and flans that can be defeated by brute forcing your way through them with a blade, but you'd be much better off firing off a few spells with one of the magic casting classes. Further encouraging you to experiment is the fact that you can equip 2 jobs at the same time and switch between them instantly with Triangle, so you can pop off some nasty knuckle sammies as a pugilist before swapping to White Mage and casting Cure or some other protective spell, if you can believe a man like this would ever become a White Mage. Very unrealistic, game developers. At the core of these jobs are 8 different weapon types, almost all of which I found extremely fun to use. Great swords feel fantastic, claws and knuckles are excellent for applying pressure and pair well with abilities that trigger after successive hits. Lancers are slow but surprisingly versatile with both piercing and sweeping attacks. But by far my favourite are the giant fuck-off axes and scythes though. Their attacks feel super weighty and every attack is able to be charged up, even during mid-combo. I freaking love when axe and hammer wielding characters do this kind of attack, I tell you what. Consider it and my button's pushed. Shame there aren't any big fuck off hammers though. Like, sure you can get hammers, but they're classed as maces and they're those tiny one-handed ones and ew, no. If my hammer can't turn an Ariman into a fine paste and be applied to a sandwich with tomato and garlic aioli, then I don't want nothing to do with it. You can mash R1 for a standard several hit combo, and in some cases, holding R1 or pushing the left stick while pressing R1 will do something different, like a forward thrust or a fancy sidestep around the enemy while you slash at them. But interjecting R2 into these combos will trigger an ability, many of which you'll unlock through leveling up your jobs and assign to a position in the combo yourself. There are a lot of different attacks you can unlock for your weapons, and you'll be able to carry them across to more advanced job classes as well. And on top of that, each job also has its own base ability activated by pressing R2 on its own. The first batch of jobs have pretty simple abilities, like making you swing your sword around in a circle a bunch of times, or weakening an enemy, or casting a spell, blah blah blah. But as you unlock more advanced jobs, these base abilities become more technical, or do way cooler things. The Berserker, for example, can increase its attack power massively at the cost of not being able to use potions for a bit. Thieves can steal instant abilities from enemies, more on those in a sec. Liberators can use Mighty Guard, which increases defense and casts regen for anyone in the area of effect. Dark Knights can sacrifice a bit of HP to do massive dark element damage, and so on and so forth. One of my favorites, and I suspect one of most people's favorites, is the Sage class, a combination of both White Mage and Black Mage. Those two classes on their own were great, but Sages are able to swap between White and Black magic during casting by clicking L3, making them extremely versatile. Let alone the fact that repeatedly casting spells decreases casting time for a bit, so you'll be firing off Thundaga spells quicker than you can work out how you're supposed to pronounce it. Is it Thundaga or Thundaga? Heck, why is Final Fantasy like this in general? Marlboro or Marlboro? Titus or Tidus? Chocobo or Little Scrunkly? I hate this franchise. Combat as a whole in Stranger of Paradise revolves around the break gauge. Whacking enemies whittles down their break gauge, and when it breaks, they're like, oh fuck me, I'm buggered. Sure hope no one comes over here and presses circle to rip my skull out of my head and beat me to death with it. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Reverse psychology doesn't work with me, you idiot. Doing this, soul burst that is, refills and extends your MP gauge, which is needed for using abilities and casting spells, and upon death you'll lose a chunk of it. In a sense, it's kinda like Burnout 3. A soul burst is like a takedown and getting killed is like getting taken down yourself. Stranger of Paradise is henceforth the Burnout 3 of the Soulslikes genre, and honestly I think finding some way to connect every game I play to Burnout is way more fun than saying everything is the Dark Souls of something. Of course, you have a break gauge yourself, and by guarding or using the soul shield it obviously depletes until you yourself are like, ah fuck me, I'm buggered. But using soul shield will negate almost any damage and even absorb certain abilities from enemies, which you can then throw back at them as you please with the square button or use them to cancel whatever action you're currently taking. Yeah, there's a lot to keep track of, but to the game's credit, it's mostly explained very well. And even for someone like me who has trouble comprehending instructions, especially if they're all dumped on me at once, it's very manageable and easy to get to grips with. And that's one thing I love about Stranger of Paradise. It kicks your ass, but it makes getting your ass kicked extremely accessible. Like when you're hanging out with your friends and you say you prefer McNuggets over KFC nuggets. Them's fighting words, boy. I've talked about this before, but I've always found it hard to get into Soulslikes, and one issue I have is one of readability. This doesn't apply to everything, but even when I'm doing the same encounter repeatedly, I tend to have a bit of trouble picking up on cues and judging what's going to happen next before acting accordingly. Like I'll look at an animation and I'll think, oh shit, is that an overhead strike? Is that a sweep? Should I be backing away? Should I dodge to the side? Maybe I should block? Maybe I should parry? And I'm dead. With Stranger of Paradise, while I do still have this issue, a lot of headache is relieved because it telegraphs attacks perfectly, at least for me, by displaying the name of the attack over the enemy right before they perform it, like other Final Fantasy games before it. Orange attacks can be interrupted with enough pushback, purple attacks can be absorbed with a soul shield, and red attacks accompanied by a red aura around the enemy and a very noticeable audio cue are unblockable. There were few instances where I felt like if I took damage or even died, it could be attributed to the game being a cheap piece of garb. And it gave me the resolve to learn, adapt, and eventually overcome. And it's thanks to Stranger of Paradise that I think I finally get Soulslikes now. The very first boss is probably not difficult to veterans of the genre. For me, it took many tries. The first time I fought it, I was a bit like, oh geez, okay, what the hell do I do? 6 or 7 tries later, and the enemy had been slain, and you better believe I had the biggest goddamn grin on my face. Much later, I was fighting Tiamat. This boss in particular is a huge jump in difficulty, almost to a point where I'd say it's a little too much for so early on in the game, but I digress. Tiamat was overwhelming. She had an attack for when I was right up close, another spinny laser attack for when I was a few feet away, And if I was on the other side of the arena charging up a spell or just getting a bit of distance, she'd either leap across the arena and flatten me or give me the old Dr. Octagonopus. Not to mention that one attack that kept poisoning me, or in the second phase how she kept regenerating her heads and her health. It genuinely seemed impossible, so I turned the game off for the night, spent 2 days playing Grapple Dog instead. Please play Grapple Dog, it's freaking great. Then a few days later came back and gave it another go. And I beat her first try. I mean, it was by the skin of my teeth, no potions left, fuck all health, piss all MP to use blood weapon to get health back, but applying all my knowledge, paying close attention to how she moved and what attacks she used, and exploiting her weaknesses as often as possible, and she was as dead as any mobile gacha game released 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think I've ever been more proud of myself playing a video game before, won't lie. Aside from like, I don't know, IA-15 in Gran Turismo 4, gold starring Beast in the Harlot on Expert Drums on Rock Band 3? I don't know, it's gotta be up there somewhere. And again, maybe it's not that challenging to people who live and breathe these types of games, but bruh, this was my first time playing anything like this for more than half an hour. The accomplishment I felt after that was second to very few. And even if I wasn't able to clear it, I still felt encouraged to keep trying, because if I wasn't able to clear it on action difficulty, I would have been able to drop it down to easy difficulty and make use of another toggle that would prevent MP loss upon death, let you block unblockable attacks, etc, etc. Maybe I wouldn't have felt as accomplished if I had dropped the difficulty down, and I do get that part of the discourse around difficulty settings to an extent, but at least if I got frustrated or stuck, there's an option that would have let me keep playing. And it's an option that lets inexperienced players get into the game too. It's genuinely good stuff, even with the caveat being that you can't raise the difficulty mid-playthrough. So while in the end I'm pretty shit at it, the combat in Stranger of Paradise is genuinely some of the most fun I've had with a real-time combat system, at least one that doesn't focus largely on guns, since, well, I don't know, Bayonetta?
I feel like a fucking celebrity in this town.
I don't know, man, it just feels really, really fucking good, and I would recommend Stranger of Paradise on just the combat alone. I cannot say the same for the elements surrounding the gameplay, however. Stranger of Paradise has an almost cavalier attitude to everything that isn't whacking tonberries with a sword. That is, either it doesn't feel like there was a lot of thought or effort put into it, or there was too much effort put into it to the point where it loops back around and seems kinda dumb and haphazard again. Visuals first. Kind of a mess. When I said that this reminds me of a PS3 game, the visuals lent a helping hand in me reaching that conclusion, because honestly, it looks like it could run on the PS3 pretty easily. Or at least at 20 FPS, which was about the PS3's average frame rate anyway. Performance is super uneven, with the frame rate dipping big time in certain areas and during certain attacks, which makes very little sense to me considering how 2010 the game looks, sometimes even worse. Some of these cutscenes, dude, oh my gosh. Music fares way better at least, in fact it's what the kids these days would call straight bangers. The battle theme wears out its welcome a bit by the end of the game, but it's still a freaking amazing track. This part right at the end, man, this part gets me every time. Oh god, that is so good! The music you hear is also full of motifs from old Final Fantasy games, which makes sense because even though the areas you traverse are reimaginings of Final Fantasy I locations, they're also heavily inspired by other games in the series. The Tomb of Wraithwall from 12, the Mako Reactor from 7. I got a real kick out of travelling up Mount Gagazet and through the Cavern of the Stolen Faith in particular, and seeing that one area with the colour-coded glyphs that Tidus, Riku and Wakka have to swim into that makes no fucking sense. What exactly about Riku makes her green? It's really cool to see these areas take inspiration from other games in this series while still mostly feeling like their own thing. But that same creativity doesn't extend to the level design itself. Each area is a self-contained locale that you select from a world map rather than travelling through them as one large open world, and each of the levels themselves are extremely linear, which is fine by me. However, apart from aesthetics, there is very little to separate most of these areas apart. You're going to be fighting enemies in one room, continuing along a hallway, arriving in the next room and taking on another set of enemies, rinse, repeat until you find the boss. You may occasionally find chests hidden behind destructible walls and objects, and there are times where the levels loop around on themselves so you can activate a shortcut back to a cube, the game's bonfires, but not much else of interest happens in these levels otherwise. Like the Tomb of Wraithwall level for example, it's got these parts where you have to drop down into a corridor where a wall starts advancing on you, and it'll either push you down into an area and set you back, or straight into a pit. As a direct nod to a memorable boss from Final Fantasy XII, I thought that was really cool. As some other examples, there's the flying airship level that has laser grids that you can knock enemies back into to immediately break them, or the 2 levels that have cannons or turrets off in the distance that you need to dodge dodge in between fighting enemies before destroying yourself. Those are fine, but they're really about as creative as the level design gets. One early area has you interacting with objects to change the weather, opening new paths and closing others. This could have made for some clever puzzles that would make you actually consider the level design and how you approach it. But in reality, if you see one of the weather changing orb thingies, you just activate it and continue along your merry way with barely any thought put into whether or not progress will be hampered. Other times you'll just be whacking things or collecting keycards or pressing switches to open doors and activate elevators. Very long, tedious, boring elevators. Anyone else suddenly want to kiss handsome Turians, or is that just me? There's just not a lot of interesting ways to interact with the environment, and this feeling is only further exacerbated when it comes to the side quests. They pop up on the world map after you reach certain points in the story, and sure, it's a good excuse to go smack some goblins and have fun with the combat system, but you're essentially just playing through those very basic levels you've already conquered, except this time you start somewhere near the end and have to work your way backwards to complete such goals as defeat all the tonberries or kill this mini-boss. Enemy placement's been mixed around, sure, but playing through these levels a second time around doesn't offer anything new. Ignoring the few unique mechanics such as the aforementioned demon walls, almost every level here feels interchangeable with the last, and the enemy variety really doesn't help with that either, with how often enemies reappear in different levels even if they don't match the setting. It's like, oh cool, we're in the Mako reactor, it's a sort of futuristic setting, maybe we'll see some soldiers or guard dogs or robots or no, okay, let's just put a Marlboro in there and call it a day I guess. When you defeat groups of enemies, they'll usually shower you in loot, and I mean that almost literally. You'll be getting multiple pieces of gear pretty much every time you initiate combat, and I personally find it overwhelming. Aside from your weapon, you've also got shields, boots, gloves, tops, bottoms, helmets, outfits that can take up tops, bottoms, and / or helmets all at once, and they all have individual levels and affinity bonuses for different jobs, and you've got 4 other party members to also assign this gear to, and my brain is leaking out of my forehead like the meat in a dropped pie. With how much gear you get and how vastly different every piece of gear is, it feels like it's just too much to keep track of. Like, does the game expect me to head into the equipment menu after every encounter just to double check that the hat you just got gives you plus 0.5% better strike damage? And when you finish a mission, you need to dismantle a good chunk of the equipment you get, because otherwise you won't have any space left for your new equipment, and unless I'm fucking stupid, spoiler alert, yeah. There's no way to discard equipment while you're in the middle of a mission. Dismantling equipment will give you materials that you can then use to upgrade other equipment, but you won't be holding onto that weapon anyway, as the next mission will start throwing you even better equipment, because while a mission says that the required equipment level is, for example, 60, and you've only got level 50 stuff, you'll almost immediately start getting level 60 equipment once you smack a few dudes. Besides, upgrading stuff is usually like, oh yeah, 0.5% strike damage on your big fuck off axe? Would you like to upgrade it so it does 0.8% strike damage instead? Treat yourself, king. If it were up to me, I would have severely limited how much gear you get, make those tiny bonuses much more substantial, and put good unique loot in chests, because as it is, chests and enemy drops are basically the same, thus diminishing the excitement of finding hidden chests. It feels like Borderlands, except with 4 times the loot somehow, plus Borderlands will somewhat often throw you a cool, unique weapon to make whatever effort you put in worthwhile. Stranger of Paradise doesn't really have that, and instead just starts throwing you whatever loot you need to match the level of the dungeon you're in, and it's very unsatisfying. And then of course there's the story. I have absolutely no idea how to approach this, if partially because there are aspects I'm not allowed to discuss due to the rules I agreed to when I received a copy of the game. Incidentally, this review copy was provided by Square Enix. I have to say that like every 20 minutes or something. I don't know if it's been 20 minutes, but I'm just trying to save my ass here. But also because this is one of the most needlessly convoluted narratives in recent memory. The first cutscene you see is what appears to be an evil knight who's kidnapped a princess, presumably Garland and Princess Sarah from the original game, and he's killing all his pursuers by impaling them violently with red crystals and making them explode. Okay, fair enough. These crystals look really yummy, I want some. Now we're in, I don't know, the future, and we got these 4 guys squaring off against some multi-headed creature, and oh shit, now we're in control, oh god, oh god! Then we cut to a scene of our main character Jack just kind of standing around in a field while My Way by Frank Sinatra plays, except it cuts off right before he sings My Way, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it seems dumb anyway. Combat tutorial time, I guess. And then Jack goes through a portal, and we cut to him outside of the Kingdom of Cornelia, where 2 other dudes walk up behind him, and they all show their crystals to each other, and Jack says,
"My mission is to kill chaos. That's all I know."
And the other 2 are like, and then they join forces then and there, but not before a fist bump, of course. Caught on yet? remember, this will be on the test. Yeah, that's how Stranger of Paradise opens, and while it doesn't feel as weirdly disjointed for the rest of the game, it maintains a similar level of absurdity while also bloating it with a lot of lore. Obviously, it's a riff on the original Final Fantasy, heroes with crystals saving a kingdom from the influence of chaos and restoring the land by activating crystals and all that. And there are even characters from the original that appear here and there, with much larger roles, such as the pirate captain BK and the king of the Dark Elves Astos, plus of course Princess Sarah. But right from the outset you can tell something's off. Doesn't the prophecy say 4 warriors of light shall rid the land of chaos? I'm only counting 3. Jack, Ash and Jed are the only ones who turn up to take chaos head on, at least until the end of the first dungeon where we acquire Neon. There we go, a woman to break up the sausage fest and the JO circles. 4 warriors of light, just as prophesized. Now let's get out there and kick chaos's ass. Oh no, there's a 5th. Ooh, this is awkward. So yeah, with the way it twists the original Final Fantasy narrative with stuff like there being 5 warriors, how they have dark crystals, as well as a bigger presence of the ancient race called the Lufenians and the gradual unlocking of characters' memories, there's a lot to think about and keep track of. And it gets so overly convoluted that you could swear that someone like Tetsuya Nomura was responsible for the concept. That explains a lot. Despite all this deep lore and plot revelation, I don't think there's a lot of substance here though. It's kinda interesting, but where it largely falters is its characters. Jack's fellow party members are all one-note personalities with nothing exactly memorable to quote, and I'm also a little disappointed with Jack himself as well. The marketing made Jack out to be this guy who just did not want to be there at all, as if he'd been isekai'd, which in a sense is true, and I really wish they'd played at that angle more, because aside from this one scene,
I offered myself to the darkness and prayed to become chaos, hoping some band of heroes would defeat me and thus bring an end to this empty dream.
Bullshit.
and I guess maybe also this one.
I don't give a fuck who you are!
His entire personality is, shut up, let's get things done, don't get in my way, it's not worth remembering things, blah blah blah. The way this guy talks makes me think he drops common loot when defeated. Oh god, please no more loot! The worst thing about it though, is that the story picks up in the last third and becomes low-key kinda awesome. I can't say much about it, of course, review code provided by Square Enix, but the ending and the few events leading up to it actually turn Jack into a really cool character, and even the other party members seem kinda cool for a fleeting moment. There are a bunch of clues you can pick up on that hint towards it, and if you've played the original game you might also have an idea of how it goes, but also the marketing for this game straight up spoils Jack's identity, which I think kinda sucks, so I'm not gonna spoil it here myself because I think it's way cooler if you figure it out for yourself. But this ending would have been heightened further if the characters were at all worth caring about, and I just don't think they are. Despite a partial redemption at the end, I still can't look back at Stranger of Paradise's gaggle of goons and say with a straight face that I liked any of them that much, or that they would leave an impression on me the same way as past Final Fantasy characters would. Wakka, the racist athlete, Balthier, the cuff-soiling sky pirate, Barrett, the guy with a Gatling gun for a hand, Ash, the... or what about Neon, who, is voiced by the woman who played Cypher in Castlevania? That's all I got. And that's why I think Stranger of Paradise is a bit of a tough recommendation for some people. Like, sure, the core gameplay is rock solid, but none of the systems outside of combat do a good job of bolstering it. Imagine how much better the combat could have been if the gear system were more refined. How much more memorable it would have been if the levels weren't just hallways with a different coat of paint. How much more emotionally driven some of the boss encounters could have been if the story were worth being invested in. But the fact remains that the core gameplay is still excellent despite all this. A lot of work went into making Jack fun to control and making his actions feel weighty and meaningful. And the boss battles in particular have been some of the most fun I've had playing an action game since, well, I don't know, a damn long time. It was so much fun that it makes me want to check out other Soulslikes, namely the series that coined the term in the first place. When a game makes you want to play a genre that you previously wanted nothing to do with, I'd say that counts for something, right? So I'd say that Stranger of Paradise is worth checking out, especially if you like the look of the combat and don't really care too much about the systems and narrative surrounding it.
As such, you should touch it as much as possible. Hey,
thanks for watching. Remember when I did Patreon Q&As? Yeah. Anyway, here's a bunch of questions that got asked ages ago, and I never answered because I'm slack. Jack Batlington asks, do you have any more Sonas in the work, or are you planning on making any female-looking versions of your Sonas? I have a third Sona now. His name is Bo. He's a non-binary bunny with long floppy ears and resting bitch face, and he plays the bass and sings, and I love him and I want to kiss him. Not sure about female Sonas, because Remy already kind of fills that role. Their gender is an amorphous blob and takes whatever shape I want it to. But also, gender-bending AUs are not something I'm opposed to. Hehe. Daniel Rotwind asks, what's currently playing in the background while you're in the process of editing this? Alive with the Glory of Love by Say Anything. Hell yeah. I love when you buy a song randomly on Rock Band on a whim because it sounds fun to play, but then it turns out to be a certified hood classic and you can't stop listening to it. Skadius Grim asks, is a hot dog a sandwich? No, it's a Frankfurt. Native Light asks, how have you been lately? Cromulent. Totally fine. I don't know, I'm just sort of cruising at my own pace as of late, but I've been feeling better than normal, I guess. More than anything, I kind of just want to buckle down and get videos and art done, so yeah, I don't know, that's fine by me. Inferno the Fox asks, gosh frickin' darn it, Remy, where the heck are we? The back rooms. And I just farted. Anyway, here's some stinky names. Sofox, Furball, Kate, Damien Maxted, Nation McGaltile, Aetheric Ruby, Heathoot Skyet, Jayet, Johannes Anderson, Kuroto the Kitsune, Leo Alex 50, Pear Basket, Philip Elk, Runfast S. Smith, Sheepy, Skadius Grim, The Dervinator, Zip, Skady Killer, and Chris Fireball. You're all sweet beans and you deserve a kiss. Anyway, usual stuff, follow me on Twitter, join the Rack Shack Discord server, you can send fan art to me on Twitter or my email, theremyraccoon@gmail.com, pledge to Patreon and coffee, and also PayPal me $20. I don't know, that sounds good to me.